Hello, dear listener. Welcome to my channel, where stories are so scary that only the bravest and most fearless can listen. If you are sure that you are brave enough, subscribe to my channel and I will question your bravery. But before you do, let me warn you, these stories are not for the faint of heart. They are not for people who scare easily. They are for people with ice in their veins and darkness in their hearts. If you are one of those people, then I welcome you. Come closer, listen closely, and prepare yourself for the horror that awaits. I had no idea what triggered this memory from when I was 11. I was sitting in the living room talking or watching TV or something a few years back, maybe 2009, and it suddenly just popped into my memory. I lived half of my life in Northern Virginia. My old elementary school, where my younger siblings still attended, had an open playground after all school functions were over, on weekends and during the summer. There was also a nearby rec center, which was closer to the old playground than the new playground. The summer after my 5th grade year, 1999, is when this happened. My mother worked on the garden in front of the school, and with it being summer, probably early summer, she had a decent amount of work to do. We lived pretty close by, and we would go with her to play on the playground, and I would ride my bike around. My brother would have just finished 3rd grade, so he could play with the other kids since I was usually nearby, and my younger sister would have just finished with kindergarten, thus staying with my older sister on the playground or with my mom while she worked in the garden. So I'm riding my bike around, staying on the sidewalk closer to the school because it was one of those older bikes that you had to pedal backwards to stop, so it wasn't very good on grass or even dirt. Anyway, I'm in front of a section of the school where there was a set of double doors, and the doors are set a ways into the wall, so that if you're right in front of them, there is a short wall on either side before you turn a corner and can walk down the rest of the building. Note that my mom is close to the entrance of the school, and while she can see the playground and the length of the side of the building, she can't see the area I'm speaking of, and I'm pretty sure there's more than one set of doors on this side. I've just gotten to this area, where I'm pretty sure there is a water fountain on one of the walls, because I can't think of another reason I would be there. And this man walks up. He starts talking to me. I turn to look at him, noticing the large dark sunglasses, and realize he has his penis out. Being embarrassed that I'm seeing this man peeing, I turn away, but I can see his reflection in the windows on the doors. I don't really understand why he is shaking himself. I do now. Or why his voice is sounding funny, but I don't really think anything of it. I'm extremely uncomfortable, but still answering his questions. What are you doing out here today? Do you go to school here? I'm pretty sure he asked about members of my family. Because he's an adult and I don't want to be rude, I finally gathered the courage to hop on my bike and ride away, as he is not that close to me, but I don't say anything to my mom because I'm extremely embarrassed. I leave my bike near the car and go to the playground, trying to forget this unfortunate experience. And then I encounter a boy I met during the school year named Ronnie. He lived nearby, so I would see him every now and then, or hanging out near where the other kids are. I had a crush on him and liked not to be so close to the younger ones because we were obviously much cooler. And he asked me if I had seen the weird guy that was peeing. I told him I had, and we talked about how weird it was. As far as I know, he never mentioned this to his parents either. For some reason, we both thought he was peeing, despite Ronnie being a year older than I was. Considering our comprehensive sex ed class, and the fact that Ronnie was at the age when most boys are discovering themselves, we really should have known better. But as far as I know, no one on the playground got hurt. There weren't many kids around, and none of my siblings saw him. The fact that I didn't see any pee should have also been an indicator, but I was really embarrassed about it and wanted to just push it out of my memory. Fast forward to around 2009, and I suddenly and inexplicably recall this occurrence. I tell my mother about it, and being older and much less naive now, I know exactly what he was doing, still remembering exactly how he stood and everything. My mother was shocked and expressed a wish that I would have told her, but doesn't remember anything in the news about a man being caught there or any children disappearing or reporting anything. So we assumed that nothing beyond him masturbating in public happened. I don't recall ever seeing him again, though I'm sure seeing him peeing at a playground more than once would make me tell someone. This happened about 9 years ago when I was in middle school. I had totally forgotten about it till my friend brought it up yesterday. In 7th grade, my best friend and I would walk down to her family's restaurant after school. It was about 4 blocks from the school, not a long walk at all. Between the school and restaurant, there was a public park with a playground. Only kids from the school would hang out there. Sometimes when the weather was nice, we would hang out at the park. If we were there for more than an hour, usually her uncle would come check on us. We did this for most of the school year. Around March, a strange man started showing up around the park, trying to talk to girls, asking about the school or things they'd like to do. He did this for a couple of weeks, then disappeared. We never really thought much of it. Then one day it was just my friend and I at the park, and he shows up. He starts talking to my friend, trying to get him to go with her. She keeps telling him no. He grabs her arm and tries to pull her along. We both scream for him to let her go. Her uncle was on the way to check on us, and he heard us scream. We can see him running towards us. He tackles the guy and tells us to run to the restaurant. We go and tell her mom what happened. Her mom calls the cops, but the guy hit her uncle and got away. The cops never found him and told us if anything else seemed suspicious, to call them. My husband and I, with our kids, 2 and 4 years old, until recently moved to a new city. It wasn't completely new to me, as I had grown up in the surrounding areas. The move was hell with 2 toddlers, and I knew they must have been having a difficult time. However, my husband and I just wanted to get everything unpacked in the new house before anything else. We made sure to unpack the kids' toys first. After all the unpacking, the kids were beyond restless. We had a hell of a time just keeping them from breaking some of the stuff during unpacking. You know, because kids don't want their toys. They want boxes and anything that isn't theirs. Needless to say, we were all a little restless and a bit agitated. I immediately thought we should take them to the park, meet some other kids from this area, etc. I remember when I was a kid, there was a park in town that was just amazing. In memory, it looked like a giant castle, the same size as a 2-story house, and had all sorts of extra swings, tire tunnels, etc. I tell my husband and I look up directions, and we get in the car and head off to the park. The closer we get, I start to notice how the neighbors were in some state of disrepair. This area had been hit hard by hurricanes in the early 2000s, and it seemed quite a few had not been able to repair their houses, thus the decline of the neighborhoods. I felt bad to see such a nice area become so broken down, and so we had to stop at a red light before the park. An older woman was standing at the bus stop on the other side of the driver's side. Her clothing was a bit ragged, and at first it pulled my heartstrings enough to ask my husband to let down the driver window so I could ask if she needed some water or something. It's hot as hell down here, even in spring, and I've worked with the homeless before. My husband was resisting, while I was thinking I should tell her that she could get free water at most fast food joints, when she starts screaming and pointing directly at us and saying something about stupid cunt. It was a bit unintelligible, because my husband never actually rolled down the window. Well, of course I'm uncomfortable, when I know a lot of homeless people are mentally unstable, if not worse. I'm with my family, and my husband decides that now is not the time and place for my soft heart to help someone. I agree. Looking back at my kids who completely ignored the scene and were excited about the park they could see. We get to the park, and just like the neighborhood surrounding it, it was crap. My husband and I aren't stupid, and we take turns when going to parks to check the playground equipment and surrounding play area for anything harmful, needles, etc. It might sound like we're paranoid, but I can't tell you how many times we have actually found stuff like crack pipes. Surprisingly, and thankfully, my husband came across nothing, so I start explaining the rules to my kids before we get outside. We aren't too overprotective. We want them to have a bit of independence within eyeshot, but they are only 2 and 4. My husband also checks to see if he could see the woman, but the bus had stopped, and after it left, she was no longer there. We get out and we decide we're going to shadow. Sounds creepy, but just means follow around the kids today to keep an eye close on them. My son loves the swings, so after a quick game of chase, we head for the swings. We were there for a few minutes, counting, talking about the sky and such. I'd look around to see where my husband and daughter were, when suddenly through one of the tunnels comes that older woman. Well, it scared the shit out of me. She crawled out in a weird way, and she was talking in a raspy voice the entire time. I decided it's time to leave and get my son out to find my daughter and husband. About this playground, the interior of the castle has all of the towers and swing sets with a wooden castle gate surrounding it. Safety for kids since there is a major street right next to the park. So as you guess, we're blocked by this woman who is coming towards the swings with her head bent down, still mumbling. I put myself between my son and her before we pass, and just as we're about to pass, she jerks her head up and begins to scream at us. I scoop my son, still blocking him from her. I start to run towards the exit. I shout for my husband and feel my shirt being pulled back. Luckily, my husband was already coming towards us with my daughter after hearing the scream. Out of instinct, I jerk away and reach for my pocket that has my small pepper spray can and hold it up until we can all get away safely. My husband takes the kids. He knows I know what to do and how to protect myself. I'm facing the parking lot and see my husband has gotten the kids in the car. Luckily, she decided to wait for some reason until my kids were out of earshot to threaten my family. She seemed particularly keen on threatening to kill my kids. It was pretty grotesque, which internally makes me want to do horrible things to her. However, I stayed neutral, refusing to give a reaction. This woman is obviously hostile. I'm gently talking to her, explaining I'm not going to hurt her, and ask if she has any family or if she lives around the area. She completely ignores it and continues on with her incoherent, rambling threats intermingled. I refuse to pepper spray her because she hasn't actually physically hurt me, and she is keeping her distance now. My husband apparently called the police, because as we were at a standstill for a few minutes, 2 cruisers pull up. They pull next to my husband, who points them in our direction. They come over and take her away. She doesn't even struggle. My husband had to move away at this point so the woman wouldn't be able to see our car as she was being arrested. So I wait while they get her in the car. Before she gets in, I see her glance to her left and squint. I come up the playground with another officer from the other cruiser and see she's looking at her car, which is parked by some trees. I look back as they are putting her in and see her mumbling quietly, trying to get another view of our car. As I'm giving a statement, I let the officer know my fears about her getting too good of a glimpse of her car. He shrugged, because what can you do, you know? And let me know they'd keep an eye on this park. They reassured me she'd probably be in custody for a while and forget everything. About a month later, the incident wasn't forgotten, but not fresh either. We never go to that park anymore just in case. One day I'm in front of her house with the kids, showing them how to pull weeds from the garden. We're having a good time getting dirty when I hear a woman shouting angrily about a block away. I stand up and staying calm, tell the kids we need a water break. We brush off, and as we're going inside, the yelling gets closer. I turn and look at the crossroad on her street, and sure enough, it's that woman. Her head is shaved now. That's not terribly important, but I can't shake that part. I get the kids inside, and she comes to stand by her house in the road. She screams, and I barely make out anything. However, I do hear her say she found this now. She won, and now it's her turn. I honestly call the police, but as I'm on the phone, she sprints off. I let the dispatcher know which way she was heading, but refused to go outside and keep watch. An officer arrives to make sure we are safe, and stays in our neighborhood until the end of his shift to make sure everything is okay. A week or so passes without incident. I still refuse to bring the kids out front just in case. Our backyard is fenced, so that feels safe enough. The next weekend we are all outside just relaxing when I hear banging on our front door. It was so loud we could hear it from our backyard. My husband takes over at this point, goes inside to grab his gun and check the door. I gather the kids close, but don't go inside just in case there is an altercation. The knocking stops, and I figured my husband is dealing with it. I keep a hold of the kids by telling them a story, when suddenly I see hands above our wooden fence. It appears to be someone jumping up to grab on. I get all of us inside and let my husband know what is going on. I call the cops, and he heads out front to the fence. My husband comes in and says she ran off. I knew immediately it was that woman. I asked my husband about it, and he confirmed what I thought. He also told me there was thin scratch marks on the door, and a puddle of piss in the welcome mat. Lovely. The cops arrive, and we give them everything we know, even telling them of the piss-puddled mat. It's been a month without incident now. Hopefully, she's gone for good. This story is 100% true. Even though I was only 8 years old at the time, I can recollect every chilling detail. I moved to a new town. This town was much nicer, cleaner, and quieter than the one I lived at before. Not the sort of town you would expect to have things wrong with it. There was a very big public park right in the center. It housed rows upon rows of swings, slides, infested with snake-like tunnels that weaved in and around the playground, providing a maze for children to lose themselves in their games. There was even a functioning merry-go-round, which seemed to always be slightly turning, inviting the children to hitch a ride on its platform of twirls. I have to emphasize on the fact that it was a quiet, peaceful town, the kind of town where kids could leave their house on their own and take a short journey to the park. I had been given strict instructions by my parents that I should come home the second it started turning dark. My life was wonderful, or so it seemed. It was a Friday. I knew the day because I remember coming home with a big smile on my face, as I knew I had the luxury of non-stop playing for the next 2 whole days. I did what I always did. I chucked my school bag on my bed, changed my clothes, and in a matter of minutes, I was ready to descend into a world of fun. Nothing could stop me. The tunnels were my favorite. It was so easy to get lost in them, which made great fun for playing hide-and-seek with my only 2 friends, Billy and Tom. They were both in my class, and we, like many 8-year-olds, loved games that filled us with pure adrenaline. We were going to play murder. I don't expect anyone to know this game. We made it up. The rules were very similar to hide-and-seek, except when the one seeking found you, they had to murder you. It was only pretend, obviously. It was nearing winter, as I remember being slightly cold as I wormed my way around the tunnels, furiously trying to find a perfect hiding spot. Billy was the seeker. Tom had hidden behind the merry-go-round. I was alone. It must have been maybe 10 minutes, which for an 8-year-old felt like a year, when I decided to do what all kids do when they get bored. I give up. I shouted, my voice echoing through the tunnels. I'm in the tunnels. I give up. I then heard shuffling from one end of the tunnel. I don't know why, but I froze still. I didn't call out again. I just waited. Something wasn't right. Billy would always say something before coming in after someone in the tunnel. He would always congratulate them on being the last to be found, or for cheating by hiding in the endless maze of tunnels. As I stood frozen, the shuffling grew louder. I could tell it was starting to get dark outside, as the tunnels began to slowly but surely drop into darkness. I began to slowly shuffle backwards. The shuffling ahead of me grew louder, as if someone or something way too big for the tunnel was trying to navigate through them. Come out. It's time to go home now. A very creepy voice echoed through the tunnels. It sounded like when a grown man talks to small children, talking slightly higher pitched. It was definitely wrong. I probably would have came out if the voice was outside, but it wasn't. It was coming from inside the tunnels. Why would an adult crawl inside? I was shuffling further and further back when the face of an old man appeared in the darkness ahead of me. Patches of hair on his head, and a definite look of someone who hadn't showered in the last week. I couldn't see what he was wearing, but I knew it was tattered, old clothes. He had a scraggly beard, which was peppered with dirt. The second we made eye contact, he just smiled at me, revealing his filthy unbrushed teeth, which had blotches of brown and black covering them entirely. I panicked. I turned around and began shuffling on all fours as fast as I could, the shuffling behind me growing even louder and quicker. He was chasing me. I sped through the maze for what felt like an eternity. I only stopped when my legs refused to move anymore. I had taken so many twists and turns that even I was completely lost. I don't want to hurt you. I just want to talk. The voice echoed through the tunnels. I could tell he was nearby. I pressed my body against the bottom of the small, narrow tunnel and listened. He continued to make soft, cooing noises, begging me to come out and present myself to him. I lay in that tunnel for hours. No exaggeration. Even after I heard him curse to himself and angrily force his way out of the tunnel, I continued to wait. Thoughts raced through my mind of me coming out of the tunnel, only to be met by the same smile that once greeted me. In the darkness of the tunnel, I could make out blue flashing lights on the outside. I heard frantic voices calling 3 names repeatedly. Billy? Tom? Michael? When I heard my name, my heart slowly began to calm. My parents had come. I easily shuffled out of my hiding spot, guided by the wet dirt scrapings along the walls of the tunnel, the way the man must have gone. Outside, I was greeted by several police cars and lights flashing. There were groups of adults with concerned looks on their faces. I recognized 2 of them, my parents. Mom, Dad, I wailed, crying as I ran toward them. They began crying and ran towards me, lifting me off the ground and hugging me so tight, it felt as though I was being crushed. Billy and Tom were taken that evening. Their bodies were later found hidden nearby, mutilated. They had been brutally massacred. Their skulls had been caved in with a large iron bar, and their bodies had deep cuts everywhere, large pieces of glass found buried in their backs. What chills me to the fucking bone is that the wet dirt I saw in the tunnels wasn't entirely dirt. Some of it was Billy and Tom's blood. After slaughtering my 2 best friends and making eye contact with me in that tunnel, he just smiled. He had won the game. About 20 students, myself included, from my university, did a study abroad program in France last summer. We were spending a week in Paris before going to the town where the university was located. Most of the group got a group flight deal to Paris through the university. Others flew separately. The only requirement was that we had to be in Paris by the day we had to leave to go to our university. Most of us had arrived by the 3rd day into our Paris trip, except for my friend Amanda. Naturally, we were all worried about her, and because her phone wasn't working, she had to update us from Facebook whenever she could get free Wi-Fi, which wasn't very often. Her flight had been delayed about 6 times already. Another day passed, still nothing from Amanda. We're all freaking out at this point. Since her phone wasn't working, we couldn't even contact her. The 5th day rolls around, still nothing. We all had a scheduled bike tour of the city that morning and a boat ride on the river that afternoon. So we didn't return to the hotel until about 7 that evening. When I got in, Amanda was asleep in our room. We were assigned roommates. Of course, I woke her up and asked her where the hell she had been. She told me that when she finally got to the airport, she was exhausted and broke. She had multiple layovers and had basically spent all her on-hand cash on food. Plus her bank card wasn't working. For those of you unfamiliar with Charles de Gaulle Airport, it is fucking massive. Unless you have a map or understand French completely, you will get lost. So she gets there, lost, broke, tired, hungry, and carrying like 3 big-ass bags, sitting inside the terminal. She said this good-looking guy walked up to her and started talking to her in perfect English. "You look tired. Do you need a taxi to your hotel?" Red flag number 1. What taxi driver gets out of this cab and walks into the airport to find a rider? Not thinking, she says, "Yes, thank you so much, I'm exhausted." He smiles at her and grabs one of her heavier bags and tells her to follow him. She does, and he leads her to this elevator. Red flag number 2. She was already on street level from where all the taxis depart. She gets inside, and he hits the button for the basement level. He gets on the phone before the elevator opens and starts speaking in French, which she couldn't really understand because it was slang. She starts freaking out though when the doors open. It was a service deck meant for employees of the airport or something, not for passenger parking or taxi pickup. It was damp and dark, and as she said, something literally out of a horror movie. The guy gets out of the elevator first and turns to her smiling. "Hello, Zik. Let's go," in French. She takes a few steps and sees, in the far corner of the deck, the trunk of this green, unmarked van with no license plate open, and a huge, ugly-ass Middle Eastern guy step out of the driver's seat. At this point, she realizes she's in trouble, but she doesn't want to alert the smiling guy that she's about to get the fuck out of there. There's no one in sight, so screaming would be useless, but the lift door is still open. She quickly placed one of her bags in the middle of the lift entrance and told Smiley Guy that she needed her wallet that was in the bag that he was carrying. He looks at her sternly for a minute, but walks over to her and hands her the bag. She told me that she pushed him down onto the ground with the weight of the bag and got back onto the elevator as fast as she could. He got up and was bounding after her. She said, "Girl, I hit every goddamn button on the elevator panel." The doors closed as soon as he reached her, and she could hear him banging on them as she was going back up to street level. She got to the taxi pickup lane and started bawling. A police officer approached her. She told him what happened, and he drove her to the hotel. On the way, he told her that the men were likely linked to a sex trafficking ring and were approaching young women inside the airport who had tags on their luggage indicating they had come from the United States, assuming that American women were more trusting. I owed my good friend a favor back in high school, so he asked me to pick him up and his mother and little brother from the airport and drive them to their new house one weekend. They had been out of the country for several months and were in the process of moving again, so they rented this piece of shit house in the middle of a really bad neighborhood, which I suppose just served as a place to store their crap. I waited at the airport for them as their flight gets delayed for over 3 hours. Around the time they land, we pack up their bags, and it's almost 4 a.m. I'm exhausted, but I have to drive them to their house about 45 minutes away, then travel another hour back home. I mentally brace myself for a long trip, and drank a Red Bull to give me a jolt of energy. As I'm pulling out of the airport parking lot, a small dark blue car pulls behind us. No big deal, I barely noticed it, and it stayed a ways behind. However, I noticed after I'd made several wrong turns, none of us had GPS, and they were giving me directions from memory, and corrected my course, that this car is still cruising, slowly but surely, behind us. I think to myself it's a weird coincidence, but took a mental note of it. Eventually we get closer to their neighborhood, and thus closer to a really bad part of town. We pull up to a red light, and I check my rearview mirror. Two men. One had a bigger silhouette, and the other kept shaking his head like he was trying to get a crick out of his neck. Now they have my full attention. Why the hell are they still behind me? For some strange reason, I'm hoping that this was just a stupid coincidence, and my sleep-deprived brain is causing me to become paranoid. Until they followed us into the neighborhood. No fucking way. I say loudly enough to wake my sleeping passengers. I fill them in, and they shrug it off. But I'm not taking any chances. Hold on to your butts, I tell them. We pull up to a stop sign, and I suddenly gun my SUV. I begin whipping around turns, and sure enough, they are trying to keep up. I quickly and repeatedly change streets, trying to evade them. Another oncoming car causes them to slam their brakes behind me, allowing me to pull ahead and lose sight of them. Once that happens, I take a few more turns to lose them. It was a big neighborhood, and pull into a random driveway and kill the engine. A minute later, the car comes roaring down the street. The whole family is on edge, now telling me to just head home. I tell them to give it a second. The car comes roaring back down the street, faster than before. I waited until I couldn't see their lights or hear their engine before I turned mine back on and continued to our destination. Many pats on the back from the family. We eventually got to their house and brought up their bags in with no hassle. They were dead tired, but I decided to stay up and watch the house until it was light, to make sure that those guys hadn't somehow found my car again. I left around 8 a.m., ready to be back in my bed to sleep. I don't know, my friend. Any more favors? Just this past summer, my younger sister and I went to visit family and friends out of state. My sister at the time was 16, and I'm 18. Just for some reference, my sister and I look very alike, but a lot of the time I get that she looks way older than me, like in her 20s. She's got a good 5 inches on me. Both of us are very loud and obnoxious, especially when we're together. We arrive at the local airport, and my parents of course freak out and worry and then send us off. We went to our local airport, which is pretty small in comparison to the size of the city we live in. My sister and I find her gate, and we had at least an hour before because our flight kept getting delayed due to an emergency landing our plane had to do for someone on board. We were just sitting around, literally off on our own. The airport really isn't big at all. Once you get through security, you make a left to where some gates are on our right, and to where the other gates are, and they have a few shops and restaurants in between these gates. We were at the closest gate possible to where all the restaurants were located, and there had to be like 3 other gates down past us, gate B and C, and obviously we were at A. So we're sitting alone, our flight really didn't have many other people, and we were extremely early anyway, and there was like 100+ other seats. And I'm sitting on the floor charging my phone watching Netflix, and my sister is on a chair next to me doing the same. Some weird older guy just sat right across from us. Mind you, all the other fucking seats around. The dude himself reminded me of the murderer from The Lovely Bones, except way skinnier, like oddly skinny. So me and my sister are doing small chat in between watching our shows, and we keep hearing the announcements about our flight, and we're both cracking jokes and making comments like we always do, just messing around. Almost every single thing we say, this guy laughs at. I mean, I know when we're together we're pretty funny, and he would laugh at things like, "Do you want water?" Or, "Wow, this is taking a while." Like not even remotely a joke. I personally am a very alert person and get paranoid easily, especially since I read these stories so often. Like I'm always aware of my situation. So I kept my eye on this dude as he kept watching my sister and I. Mostly my sister. I'm on the phone watching Netflix when all of a sudden my sister texts me and says, "I think this guy is taking pictures of me." I was taken aback and a little shocked. I texted back, "Are you sure?" And she said yes. That's when my full crazy sister mode went out. My sister and I are extremely close. I would give my life for her and I don't put up with any shit. Neither does she. And she was very feisty. When I could tell she was scared. As soon as I looked up to give this guy a piece of my mind, he just got up and left. He looked like he was about to shit a ton of bricks. I turned to my sister asking her what happened, and she said she was on the phone and looked up to see him with his phone tilted right at her. I said, well, maybe he wasn't taking pictures, but she said she could tell just based off the way he was acting, like a teenage girl who's trying to secretly take a picture of a cute boy or something and isn't really being discreet about it. After talking to her about it, I was angry. Who would be taking pictures of a 16-year-old girl? I got up and walked down the gates the direction the guy went in. Eventually, I saw him leaning up against the bathroom door, next to the men and women's bathroom. I went into the women's bathroom trying to act inconspicuous. I shit you not. As I was entering the bathroom, I peeked at his phone screen, and my heart dropped. It was a zoomed-in picture of my sister's face. It was unmistakable. He quickly looked up to make eye contact with me, stashed his phone in his pocket, and darted into the men's bathroom. I immediately returned to my sister. I told my sister, and we immediately texted our mother, who freaked the fuck out, telling us to inform the employees there and to find a security guard. We continued to wait for him to return from the bathroom, but he didn't, so we held off from telling security. The weirdest part besides him taking pictures was when me and my sister boarded the flight. The man did not. He didn't return to our gate, and wasn't even on our flight. So he was just sitting across from us, taking pictures of us for literally no other reason than being a weirdo. In May, I was going on a trip to Jacksonville, Florida. We had to stop in the Twin Cities. So while my grandparents and I were waiting for 3 hours, I decided to go and get pizza and tea. Now, I'm not familiar with the Twin Cities airport, mainly because all the times I've been there, I was fairly young. I ordered a tea from this kiosk-looking thing and a piece of Hawaiian pizza from the place in front of it. I sat down to eat and got out my phone and decided to check my email and go on Tumblr. About 10 minutes afterwards, some guy who sort of looked like Shaggy from the live-action Scooby-Doo movie comes and sits down in the seat in front of me, just staring at me. I told him to mind his own business, and he just said, I just can't help it. You're so beautiful, and I would love to show you around. I told him that I was a minor. His response, no one has to find out. Come on, I have a dog you can have. After that sentence, I ran off into the nearest washroom and thought about what to do. Maybe he won't realize I ran into the washroom, I thought to myself. I can just go tell my grandma about what happened, and she'll ruin him. Needless to say, I thought wrong. I walked out of the washroom, only to be greeted with that nasty hippie face of his. Where did you go? Come on, Mom's worried about you. I told him I didn't know what he was talking about. Oh, don't be silly, my darling little sister. Mom's waiting for us. Come on. I realized what he was doing, and so I decided that the best thing to do was scream and say, get the fuck away from me. He gestured for me to quiet down. I stomped on his foot and ran off. I immediately informed security, and they escorted him out of the airport. So I'm a 20-year-old male, and I flew to India last November to meet a few family members. It was my first time flying on my own to India, and despite what family would tell me, I wasn't at all worried since I can speak and understand Hindi, although quite badly. Also, I looked like I could pass for an Indian, which I thought would help me blend in. I landed at around 2 a.m., and after landing at Mumbai International Airport, I had to catch a quick airport coach to take me from the international to the domestic airport. Standard procedure, although I found it a bit strange for such a busy airport to have such a system, I managed to make my way onto the coach. Now I know you must be thinking that the coach must be fake, but it wasn't the coach. I managed to get to the domestic airport just fine, and as I was waiting to disembark, I saw some people dressed in airport gear checking people's boarding passes. So, I held my pass to show the guy, and as he looked at it, he gave a perplexed look. He scanned my pass again and stated that my flight wasn't due to depart for 4 hours. This is true, but I thought I'd chill at the airport anyway. He said that I'd have to take a taxi and go back to the international airport, as they would not let me go into the domestic unless the departure was less than 2 hours. I obviously wasn't going to pay for a taxi back to the airport, and didn't understand why the airport wouldn't let me in. However, after thinking about all the weird procedures Indian airports have had so far, such as having to collect my bags at Mumbai airport and check them back in the same place, disorganized queuing everywhere, get a damn coach to and from the same airport, and the dim lights of the domestic terminal, I thought this may be another one of its irritating quirks. I agreed with the guy and walked with him to the car park. He was asking me where I was from and what I was doing in India. Just some friendly banter, I thought. But I was too tired and shy to even attempt to speak to him in Hindi. I kept telling him I'm not paying for the taxi, and I have no money on me just to make sure he wasn't going to scam me. He kept nodding and took me to the taxi he said I should take. Now, from watching Bollywood films, I know how Mumbai taxis look. They're yellow and black and are a distinctive model. This taxi was a normal silver-colored car with not even an ounce of credibility to pass as a taxi in Mumbai. Surrounding the taxi were a bunch of eerie-looking guys, all looking at me with a straight face. Feeling a bit awry, I backed away a bit while they were talking to one another. Thankfully, the guy who led me to them didn't know I could speak Hindi, and they were saying stuff like, "He's some sweet goods. We'll have fun with him. You brought a good one. I'll be sure not to let him go." Aghast, I started sweating and shaking. I know people back home have said I act a bit camp and apparently unintentionally act flirtatious, but I had no idea that a bunch of Indian guys would have any interest in me apart from maybe getting some money. Visibly shaken, I was completely speechless and had no idea how to get out of the situation. The guy had my boarding pass and the car door was open. Then I had an idea. I said to the guy in English, "Can I just quickly buy a coffee? I've been parched for so long." He stated that the police at the door of the airport wouldn't let me in no matter how much I tried, and the best thing was to get into the car. I insisted that I just try to get in as I was really thirsty, and my voice started croaking, out of fear originally, but thankfully it could be passed as thirst. His friends told him to give me my boarding pass back and let me try it out. He gave it back and made me promise I'd come back after the coffee. I obviously obliged, and gave him a cute smile as I snatched the pass and power walked it to the terminal. Of course, I didn't want to act too alarmed as they could have easily ran up to me and tackled me. In addition, the police could have been in cohorts with them and refused me access. Thank you, Indian News. So I made my way to the terminal and showed the policeman my boarding pass. He had a look and I asked him if I was allowed to enter the terminal just to make sure. He said, "Of course, your flight departs from here," and directed me to the departures lounge. I've never felt so thankful in my life. I breathed a sigh of relief as I hightailed it up the escalator and passed the security check to make sure the gang wouldn't be let in. It was about 4 a.m. at this point, And all I could think of was what would have happened if I couldn't understand Hindi and went into the taxi. To this day, I shudder at the thought. My only regret is not informing the police when I was let in. I think nerves did get the better of me, and I felt distrust towards everyone. Plus, Indian police officers wouldn't have done much to help the situation. Probably would have told me to keep calm and carry on. Anywhere I went to Washington, D.C. with some very close family friends. Coming from a town of about 11,000 people, and never having been to a city even close to DC's size, I was scared out of my mind that I'd get pickpocketed or mugged or something. TV had led me to believe that big cities like this had absolutely packed streets that were difficult to walk on, resulting in regular occurrences such as these. Needless to say, I was relieved when the trip ended without any such incident. At the DC airport, our 6 a.m. flight was delayed 3 or 4 times due to weather. By the time we finally got to the Denver, Colorado airport, it was around midnight, preventing us from driving the rest of the way home that night as we had originally planned. I refused to be on airplanes unless absolutely necessary. So when we landed, I had to go. So I, along with my friend's mom, who also had to go, went to the restroom. When I came out of the stall, I noticed the security lady was now standing beside the door. I had heard no other footsteps come in the completely empty restroom. My ears were actually quite alert because the empty airport freaked me out. So this confused me a bit, but I just smiled at her and washed my hands. Approximately 10 seconds later, a toilet flushed. Instead of my friend's mom, a creepy-looking man with a black sweatshirt on, hood up, emerged from the stall. At the sight of the airport employee, he lowered his head and quickly walked out of the restroom. She followed him out, saying, "This is clearly marked a woman's restroom." At the time, probably most due to sleep deprivation, I didn't think much of it. But the next day it really dawned on me. A man wearing a black sweatshirt with the hood up in a woman's restroom, which was marked as such with quite an enormous sign. It's midnight, and the airport is practically deserted. Plus, he entered the restroom without a single sound, which for me was the worst part. I don't recall hearing any footsteps or extra sounds of urination or anything like that. So I honestly don't think he even used the restroom at all. Rather just pretended by flushing the toilet. I repeatedly mentally thanked that security guard for seeing this. I very well could have been kidnapped, murdered, raped, who knows. He easily could have jumped me. I hadn't even looked up until the security guard spoke to him. But the second I did, I got a very creepy vibe from him. And he very notably tried to avoid making eye contact. I have to preface this story by saying I was a really smart kid when I was little. At 18 months, I knew every word to the bare necessities from the Jungle Book and would perform it for my mom's co-workers. I don't think anyone ever taught me what to do in a situation with a stranger, just not to talk to them. I also have to say that when I was little, around 3 to 4, my mom let me cut my hair really short, like a boy's. And everyone mistook me for one because I refused to wear anything girly. Also, like small children, I wasn't a good listener. For some reason, my grandma took me to the airport with her one day when she was watching me. I can't remember if my parents had gone out of town, or if we were picking up someone else, and she had to bring me because it was her day to watch me while my parents were at work. Regardless, this was before security in the airports were super tight. So we were headed to a gate to pick whoever it was up. Or maybe we were just getting out in the main airport, and it seemed like we were headed to a gate because I was so much smaller, so everything seemed bigger. Forgive lack of memory, I was little. I do distinctly remember, however, that my grandma scolded me for running ahead of her and told me not to do it again. 5 minutes later, I'm at it again. I ran down a small flight of stairs, maybe 3 or 4 steps at most, and was suddenly swooped up by a very large man. I remembered that he smelled funny, and that he had a really scraggly beard and blonde hair, and really creepy eyes. He then starts to rush off with me, and I remember being very calm about the whole thing because in my mind, my grandma was right there, and she wouldn't let anyone hurt me. Well, she came tearing after this guy, faster than I've ever seen her move, and she's yelling at him to put me down and whacking at him with her purse, and he said to her, "Lady, chill. This is my son. The kid you're looking for must have ran off." That's when little old me pipes up and says, "I am not a boy, and you are not my daddy. Now put me down." The guy looked shocked out of his mind and slightly repulsed, and promptly put me down and ran off. Now, my whole family has talked this story to death. Is it possible this guy really thought I was his son? Was he just someone who made a mistake? Or was he a pedophile who thought he had scooped up a little boy? As a whole, we tend to lean toward pedophile, mostly because of his behavior. He didn't say a word to me, just picked me up and tried to hurry off. And then when it became clear I was a girl, he hightailed it out of there as fast as he could. If he was just a man who made a simple mistake, he probably would have stuck around and apologized to my grandma for frightening her, and for snatching me. Female, and this took place back in March. I was 19 years old at the time. It was the end of spring break and I was returning to Texas from California. I just spent my vacation with my sister who lives in San Francisco. Every college kid counts down the days until spring break, and my vacation had gone rather well. However, I was slightly okay with returning to the essays and research papers because I missed my friends, my bed, and my cat. Maybe not in that particular order. I was flying alone, something I don't like doing for multiple reasons, and had only one layover in Dallas. I don't like traveling alone because I've had some bad experiences, and I happen to look a lot younger than 20. Most often, people say I look 13 or 14 at the most. I've always hated this about myself, but I'm told I'll be grateful when I'm older. As of now, it's just immensely frustrating. The last time I was on a plane by myself, the attendant thought I was an unaccompanied minor named Taylor. I quickly assured her I was not the minor in question. The time before that, I was asked to move away from the emergency exit because you have to be at least 16 to sit there. Anyways, my boyfriend was picking me up from the airport and I was excited. I wore the pink members-only jacket he had bought for me and tried to look my best, which is difficult to do when traveling. When the plane arrived in Dallas, we had some really terrible weather and the turbulence was scary. But no matter, soon I would be on another flight to Houston. I took the train around to the C terminal and made my way to the gate, only to find that, due to the torrential rain and lightning, my flight had been canceled. I was crushed, but determined. I took my ticket to be exchanged for a later flight. It seemed many others had the same grievance and were opting to do the same. As I was standing in line, a friendly-looking older man came up to me and stood behind me. "Are you alone?" he asked me. Everyone seemed to be conversing with one another, complaining about the weather and pondering their options to get home. It didn't seem like a big deal, because strangers always seem to connect in situations like this one. We were all frustrated. I also felt safe in the crowded airport, so I answered him truthfully and continued to wait in the line. The man behind the counter said I was in luck, that there was only 2 seats left on another flight to Houston, and that I could make it if I hurried. I rushed aboard the train to the A terminal to catch my new flight, and upon reaching the gate, was faced with the same situation. This new flight was canceled too. The man from before had followed me to the gate and was in the same boat. I exchanged my ticket for a later flight and resolutely marched myself to the new gate only to be told the same as before. This happened literally 2 or 3 more times because I didn't want to give up and really had no other options. The man shadowed me during the entire ordeal, and I didn't really find it strange. We were just two individuals stranded in an airport. The last gate I went to, I noticed he was still following me. He walks over to me and begins to chat about what awful luck we were having. Someone eavesdropping nearby suggests that I rent a car. I politely tell them that I am not old enough. The man smiles and says to me, "Well, I'm old enough to rent a car. How about this? I'll rent us one. You can sleep, and I'll drive." I look at him, and the way he is staring at me scares me. I finally begin to feel that something is off. I respond, no, but thank you. I'm going pretty far off." His smile falters for a moment. Then he suggests that he buy me some food. I am starving. I am tempted. I hesitate for a moment, but then I remember a book I had read about a girl who was stolen from the airport after a man drugs her coffee. This gives me the strength to deny my grumbling stomach and decline him again. He follows me. I don't know why. He's already told me he's going to rent a car and leave. He points to a Mexican restaurant and says, "Oh, how about that place?" He has a strange look on his face and is standing far too close to me. I shake my head and said, "I told you, I'm really not hungry." Lie. Big lie. I can smell something delicious, and I almost give in. But my face does not betray my hunger, and I keep my pace. Okay, yeah, what about burgers then?" He looks a bit annoyed. This guy doesn't give up easy. I ignore him. This causes him to glare at me angrily, and then stalk away. I breathe a sigh of relief. I call my sister to tell her about him. Not in a catty sort of way, just a, "Wow, that guy was persistent" kind of thing. I set into a chair to think about my options. I feel pretty alone and worried. My latest ticket had me leaving at around midnight, and it was 9 p.m. at this point. I'd been in the airport since 5 p.m. If this last flight didn't work out, I had no clue what I would do. I had no money for a hotel, and didn't fancy sleeping in a chair. The last time I fell asleep in public, on a train in France, a lady attempted to steal my backpack. But that's another story. I look up about 30 minutes later to see the same man walking towards me. I tuck my legs up in my chair nervously and pretend to play on my phone. "Hey there. Still here?" he asks. He seems to have cooled down. Just stare at him. He clears his throat and tries again. "So I was thinking you could come stay at my aunt's house for the night. With me. That's where I'm staying tonight. It would be no problem. You don't want to be in this airport all night, all alone." I shake my head and say, "No, I'm fine." Then turn my attention back to my phone. I didn't even make eye contact. I felt really uncomfortable. He tries to convince me, and I have to say no firmly several more times. He looks angry, really angry. His hands are clenched and his smile is obviously fake. It looks as if he will shatter his teeth if he clenches his jaw any tighter. I wonder to myself why he hasn't left the airport yet. Then I notice that his luggage is no longer with him. He was rolling it behind him, and now he isn't. Where would he have put it if he hadn't left yet? And so much time has passed. Why is he back here? As I'm thinking all of this, he's just standing there, staring. After what feels like forever, he storms off again. I feel so anxious because of him that I grab my things and move to a different gate to wait. My phone was dying, and I didn't want to be without it, so to charge it I have to plug it into the outlet in the floor. I crawled up in the aisle between the chairs to wait. My sister called about an hour later, and I was telling her about how creepy the dark weather looked outside, when I see him, again, walking around, glancing here and there, in search of me. I hunched down even further, but my pink jacket was like a beacon. He locked eyes at me, and I looked down. My sister said to stay on the phone, so I did. "Well, there you are," he says, not even acknowledging that I am in the middle of a phone call. I continue talking to my sister when it becomes apparent that he isn't leaving and doesn't care that I'm on the phone. I finally look up. "So you're still here? Look, you need to come with me. You can stay with me at my grandparents' tonight. They would love to have you. They don't mind me bringing you at all. Just come with me." I got chills. I don't know why, but something in his eyes told me he was lying. Lying through those shiny white teeth of his. "You said you were staying with your aunt." His face dropped. It went from cool and collected to something else. Not even anger this time, and not defeat either. Almost like amusement. Something like the cat that ate the canary. He shrugs his shoulders like, "I tried." But we both recognized that he was caught in his lie. The entire time my sister is saying, "Hello," repeatedly, when I was sort of shocked by how indifferent he was to me catching on to him. I go back to my conversation and he says, "If you change your mind," and lets the thought trail off while walking away backwards, eyes still on me. I call my boyfriend and tell him about each exchange, and he tells me to find a security guard to tell. I look around for one, but couldn't find one. It was creepy because I've never seen an airport so deserted. I end up just deciding to move again and lay down between two different aisles at a view. A boy my age walks by and asks, "Why are you laying on the floor?" And I respond a tad aggressively with, "Because I want to." He laughs and puts his hand up, the unspoken sign for, "Whoa, take it easy." I apologize for my gruffness and tell him that a man was making me nervous. He jokingly says he'll protect me, and because he seems harmless and I mention my boyfriend, I converse with him for a while. He tells me he saw me and wondered why a blonde girl looked so sad. A little while later, I am thankful I didn't brush off the stranger, because I see the man again walking around. We made eye contact, but he didn't attempt to approach me because I was no longer alone. Maybe it was just some middle-aged man trying his luck at getting a girlfriend or something, but scaring someone isn't the way to do it. Even if he meant me absolutely no harm, he was too aggressive. Yeah. The fall semester of my junior year of university was spent studying abroad with my best friend in Florence. We had a blast exploring the city, checking out timeless works of art, partying every night, making new friends, and traveling the country. Before we knew it, 4 months had gone by and we were on the way to the airport for our flight home. The night before I saw a huge snowstorm, something that is rare for Italy. The white-covered city sparkled divinely as we drove through, and I remember feeling incredibly bummed to be going home. Even though it was 5 days before Christmas and I missed my family, I wanted nothing more than to stay in Florence forever. That feeling lasted all of 20 minutes. The airport was complete chaos, and upon entering we discovered that our flight had been canceled. Cue the waterworks from my friend for the duration of roughly 13 hours. Yes, 7 a.m. to 8:30 p.m. We spent in line to try to get on another flight. Finally, we were given tickets for a new flight, but that flight was leaving from Rome in 3 days. Since we handed in our keys to our apartment and all of our other friends had flown home the day before, we were completely stranded. My friend was a complete wreck at this point, terrified at the idea that we might not make it back for Christmas, and was really no help in deciding what we should do. So, I decided the best course of action would be to hop on a train to Rome and spend the next couple of nights in the airport. After 7 exhausting hours on the train, We finally made it into the Rome airport and tried to find a corner to claim and bed down in for the coming 2 nights. We found a small area between a handicap ramp and the wall. The railing for the ramp created a sort of barrier, and it made a nice, seemingly safe nook for us to squeeze ourselves into. Exhausted, we pushed our luggage into the back of the nook and lay our backs against them. After making sure my friend was okay, I covered myself with my jacket and promptly fell asleep. I awoke to the feeling of a tug on my foot, and thinking that someone had accidentally kicked my shoe while passing by, I shrugged it off and snuggled deeper into my jacket. Not 3 seconds later, I hear a man whisper, "American, American." I felt the tug on my foot again. I jumped to my feet and see my best friend with her jacket on and her luggage by her side, standing next to a very handsome Italian man. He had salt and pepper hair and was wearing a dark suit with a champagne-colored tie. His mouth formed a dazzling smile, but his eyes weren't smiling with it. I looked at my friend quizzically, trying to figure out what was going on and why she was standing with him. Looking back at him, I noticed that he was glancing to his sides and at the guard near the exit about 40 feet from where we were standing. His behavior immediately set off alarms in my head, and I grabbed my friend's arm and pulled her back away from him. He grabbed her other arm and started talking very fast, saying that he worked for the airport and the flights out of Rome were all going to be canceled shortly, that he had a car and he could drive us to Naples and we could get a flight out of there. He said that my American friend had agreed to come with him and that I should too. "American, it is safe with me." I glared at my friend and told him in Italian that we were not interested in his offer and that we would wait for our flight. With my hand still firmly gripping my friend's arm, I grabbed my stuff and made a walk away from the creep. He immediately moved into my way, blocking us into the nook. His eyes, with no semblance of humanity, fixed onto mine as he said, "American, you are coming with me." Being cornered is a strange feeling, and prior to this instance, it had never happened to me before. My reaction was immediate, and it felt raw, animalistic, full of rage, or terror, or both. I lunged at this man, shoving both of my fists into his stomach. It definitely surprised him and definitely knocked the wind out of him, because his knees buckled and he toppled to the floor, bringing my friend down with him. As soon as they hit the ground, my friend began screaming, and the man scrambled to get up and away from us, but not before the security guard by the door got to him. In my adrenaline-filled state, I began repeating, "He's trying to take us! He's trying to take us!" as the security guard knelt on the guy's back, keeping him there until other guards could assist him. When the man was secured, they left him off the ground to bring him to what I assumed was the detainment room of the airport. As they lifted him, he looked directly at me with his empty eyes and fake smiled and whispered, "See you soon, American." As soon as he was out of my sight, I broke down sobbing. I was so exhausted and terrified, and incredibly angry at the fact that my friend had agreed to go with this man, that she had thought it was a good plan to get into a car with this person that she had never met, and that she had put us in an extremely dangerous situation. When I confronted her about it, her only excuse was that she wanted to make it home in time for Christmas. If she had gone with him, I don't think she would have ever made it home for another Christmas. I was living in Austin, Texas at the time, but had flown out to Los Angeles for the weekend. My friends put on a yearly music festival at a biker bar out around Joshua Tree. Just a relatively small town thing compared to Coachella and the like, that is, where most of the attendees are also musicians and everyone knows each other. So we drink heavily for 3 days or so. By the end of it, you tend to need at least a week to recover. So I was flying back to Texas, wildly hungover and miserable and completely drained. I had a flight from LA to Dallas, then a quick hop to Austin from there. I was seated by the window, on the left side where there were only 2 seats. Seated in the aisle seat was a middle-aged woman, totally unremarkable, just your average Texan mom. We made polite small talk for a few minutes, but I really felt like doing nothing but curling up in a ball against the wall and passing out. So shortly after takeoff, I put in my headphones and start watching a movie on my iPod until I fell asleep. Throughout the movie, I thought I noticed her trying to look over my shoulder and watch the movie too, and then mumbling something like, "Oh great, just ignore me." This happened several times, but I convinced myself I was just misreading her. Eventually, I noticed her furiously scribbling, writing in the margins of a beat-up leather-bound book. I kept peeking over to see it, seeing that the entire book was filled with unintelligible chicken scratch and pretty much every bit of available space in the margins. I also noticed it was an Alcoholics Anonymous book. Whatever, I thought. Just someone with some issues. I eventually fell asleep. Wake up, landing in Dallas. People start getting off the plane. Lady makes zero effort to start packing her things up or getting ready to go. She keeps sitting there scribbling in her book. As I said, I am wildly hungover and kind of cranky, and have no patience for anything that's prolonging the time I have to spend on an airplane. It gets to our row, and it's her turn to move into the aisle, and again she doesn't move at all. The rows behind us now start to leave. I finally say, "Hey, I've got a connection to catch, so I have to get moving here," gesturing towards the aisle and standing up. She laughs, shakes her head, looks at me and goes, "Oh, no. You aren't going anywhere." I was so confused. My mind was now at its sharpest that day. I responded with, "I assure you, I am going somewhere. I'm getting off this plane now." She shook her head again and said, "But you promised me you'd never leave me." Now other people who are leaving the plane are looking at this exchange, also baffled, and I make eye contact with a few people giving that "can you believe this" look, before edging, shoving my way out of the row, saying, Nope, I certainly never said that. I'm leaving now." As I edged past, she sighed and said, "Well, I guess I gotta go with you then." At which point she stands up behind me, leaving her purse and book and all her belongings on the plane, and follows me out. All through the tunnel, and through the terminal, and up the escalator, this woman follows at my heels, grinning like a mad woman the entire time. I'm walking fast, but she is right on my heels. I didn't say anything at first, and my mind kept saying, "Why is this happening now, of all days?" I just did not want to deal with whatever the hell breakdown this woman was having, not with the way I was feeling. Eventually getting to the waiting area for the monorail to the next terminal where my connecting flight is, and she saddles up right next to me, still grinning. At this point I say, "All right, seriously, why are you following me like this?" Her response this time, "Because I love you, and you promised me you would never be apart from me." I laughed nervously and looked around at the strangers also waiting for the train, making sure I loudly announced, "No, I did not promise that. I have no idea who you are." The train arrives. I get on. She obviously follows. Now she's trying to hold my hand. I'm moving around the monorail car, texting the girl I was seeing at the time about what is going on and how I'm actually kind of terrified by this woman. My phone was at 1% though, and died before I could get a response. I was actually getting severely creeped out by this woman. Her eyes were completely vacant. There was just nothing but emptiness in her stare. She didn't blink. Coupled with her unyielding grin, I was becoming sure it was only a matter of time before she snapped and proceeded to stab me or shove me down an escalator or something. She's still grabbing at my hand and following me as I shove around the tiny train car, and I announce to the other strangers, "I have no idea who this woman is. Seriously, can anyone get a hold of security or something? But everyone responded with silence. Nobody else wanted to deal with this either. I felt like I was the crazy one now too, making random statements to a train full of strangers. We finally get to the other terminal. I near run to my gate, with her right behind me still saying things like, "You can't get away from me this time." I get to the gate and spend a moment scanning the crowd. I see a woman in what looked like a police uniform waiting, and said, "Excuse me, are you security or police, sir?" See, this lady, but she just shakes her head at me. Everyone in the crowd just does their best to ignore us. You would be amazed at how hard it is to find security or police in a damned airport these days when you really need them. Finally, I go up to the desk and shamelessly interrupt the agent standing there. Doing my best to maintain composure, I put on a half smile and explain to them, "Hi there. So this woman standing right next to me here, I have no idea who she is, and she has been following me for quite some time." Both the agents laugh. The male one makes a comment like, "Oh, long vacation, huh? Yep. Seriously, we're gonna help you with." The crazy lady laughed with them, rolling her eyes at my absurd assertion that I didn't know her. I chuckled, shook my head, and said, "No, I mean it. I have no idea who this woman is." They finally saw the desperation in my eyes and the seriousness of my tone, and their smiles faded. Can we see your boarding passes?" I handed him mine. She produced hers from her pocket as I continued explaining. She was on my previous flight. She even left her purse on that plane, all the way in the other terminal. The agents speak with themselves off to the side for a moment, while I completely ignore the woman, just swatting away at her hand as she tries to hold mine for the 100th time. The agents make a few quick hush calls, and then come back over and just say, "Come with me." They immediately whisk me through the door and slam it on my pursuer, and I'm loaded onto the plane about 10 minutes before any other passenger, as a stream of staff filters by, each one offering a new apology. Eventually the rest of the passengers get on, and they all shoot me glances as they pass my row. Some of sympathy, some of sheer confusion. The man who sits behind me asks, "Hey man, what was that?" I give him the brief version, and he tells me, "She had a complete and total meltdown the second you got on the plane. Screaming, tearing her hair out, pounding her feet. They took her away in handcuffs." "You really didn't know her?" "Nope, I didn't. To this day, I still wonder all the time what the hell was going on with that woman. I barely even have told this story to many of my friends, because it's just so unbelievable. I never received any other information about the incident, never learned who she was, or why she thought I promised her anything, let alone eternal companionship and love." For more bone-chilling narratives that will keep you at the edge of your seat, subscribe to my channel. By doing so, you'll gain access to a growing collection of real-life horror stories that will both captivate and energize your senses. Join the community of fellow enthusiasts, and together, let's explore the eerie unknown. Subscribe now, and prepare for more terrifyingly true tales that will leave you craving more.